What happens when a billionaire mother walks into a blind date with her daughter, only to realize the quiet single dad across the table is the man who once saved her life, shattered her future, and disappeared without knowing who she really was? And why does she stand up in the middle of the restaurant and do something so shocking that everyone freezes in silence? Stay with this story until the end, because every chapter uncovers a secret that changes everything, and if you believe hidden kindness deserves its moment, hit subscribe now. You don't want to miss what happens next. She never arrived anywhere unnoticed, even when she tried, and tonight was no different, though Evelyn Cross had chosen the smallest restaurant she could find. Brick walls, dim amber lights, no paparazzi, no velvet ropes, no signs that screamed money. She walked in holding her daughter's hand, her posture calm, her expression unreadable, the kind of quiet confidence that came from building an empire and surviving things no headline ever printed. Most people in the room didn't recognize her, which was exactly the point, but a few still felt it, the subtle shift in air when someone powerful entered without announcing themselves. Her daughter, Lily, swung their joined hands gently, humming to herself, blissfully unaware that her mother owned companies that controlled ports, hospitals, and entire supply chains across continents. Evelyn had told herself this blind date was ridiculous, unnecessary, even reckless, but after 3 years of cancelled plans, unfinished grief, and a child who kept asking why grown-ups were afraid to try again, she had agreed. Just dinner, she'd said. Just an hour. Just a man recommended by a mutual acquaintance who knew nothing about her real life. And then she saw him. He was already seated, slightly hunched forward, scanning the menu like it was written in another language, his jacket too worn for a place even this modest, his hands rough in a way money couldn't soften. Across from him sat a small girl about Lily's age, her sneakers tucked beneath the chair, her hair braided unevenly, eyes bright with curiosity. A single dad, Evelyn realized instantly. She noticed the way his attention never fully left the child, how he listened even when she wasn't speaking, how he checked the doorway twice like he expected something to go wrong. That instinctive vigilance punched something old and uncomfortable in Evelyn's chest. Lily tugged her hand and whispered, "Mommy, that must be him." Evelyn nodded, forcing her feet to move, forcing her breathing to stay even as recognition struck her like a silent explosion. She knew that face. Older, leaner, shadowed by exhaustion, but unmistakable. The man who once pulled her from twisted metal on a rain-slick highway when her driver had been killed instantly. The man who had vanished before she woke in the hospital. The man she had spent months trying to find before giving up and burying the memory beneath board meetings and survival. And now here he was, Marcus Hale, looking up in surprise as she approached, standing too fast, knocking his chair slightly back, apologizing under his breath before she'd even spoken. "Evelyn," he asked, uncertain, as if testing whether the name belonged to her. She nodded, her throat suddenly too tight for words, and gestured to Lily, who smiled politely in the careful way children do when they sense adult tension. Introductions followed, names exchanged between the girls, menus shifted, chairs adjusted, small talk stitched together awkwardly while something enormous sat unspoken between Evelyn and Marcus, pressing against her ribs with every heartbeat. He didn't recognize her, or if he did, he gave no sign. How could he? That night she'd been bloodied, unconscious, stripped of everything that defined her except fear. She watched him closely as they ordered, noticing the way he deferred, the way he asked the girls first what they wanted, the way he thanked the server like it mattered. It unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. Lily and Marcus's daughter, Emma, bonded instantly, whispering secrets, comparing crayons, inventing a game with the sugar packets while the adults talked in careful, surface-level sentences. Marcus spoke about teaching history at a public school, about losing his wife to illness, about learning to be two parents at once without ever sounding like he wanted pity. Evelyn spoke about consulting work, about travel, about being busy, editing her life down to something smaller, safer. Halfway through the meal, Emma asked, "Why do you look sad when you look at her?" The question landed with the brutal honesty only a child could wield. Marcus blinked, flustered, laughing softly as he apologized, but Evelyn felt the room tilt. He shook his head. "I'm not sad," he said gently. "I just thought I recognized her from somewhere." Evelyn's heart pounded so loudly she wondered if Lily could hear it. She smiled before he could study her too closely, before memory could catch fire behind his eyes. "People say that sometimes," she replied. The lie tasted like rust. Dinner continued, but something had shifted. When Marcus excused himself to take a phone call, Evelyn watched him step outside, shoulders sagging like a man who carried more weight than he admitted. Lily leaned close and whispered, "I like him. He's kind." Evelyn closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, fighting the urge to stand up, to follow Marcus, to tell him everything, who she was, what he had done, how he had saved not just her life but the future she'd built for her child. Instead, she did something no one expected. When Marcus returned, Evelyn stood. The restaurant quieted instinctively as she reached into her bag and placed a sleek black card on the table, one that had never been meant to be seen in a place like this. She looked directly at him, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "I need you to know something," she said. "This isn't just a blind date." Confusion flickered across his face, followed by a flicker of alarm. She turned to the girls, smiling softly. "Why don't you two go look at the dessert case?" They hopped down eagerly, hands clasped, leaving the adults in a bubble of suspended time. Evelyn met Marcus's eyes. 3 years ago, she said, you pulled a woman from a wreck on Route 17 during a storm. You stayed until the sirens came. Then you left. His breath caught. Color drained from his face. Memory slammed into him like a wave. She didn't wait. That woman was me. Silence swallowed the room. And then Evelyn Cross, the billionaire who never bowed, never begged, never broke in public, did something no one would ever believe. She lowered herself into the chair across from him and whispered, "And what I'm about to ask you will change both our lives." The moment Evelyn spoke the truth, the world Marcus thought he understood fractured quietly, not with drama but with the slow, devastating realization that ordinary moments sometimes sit on top of extraordinary ones without warning, and he felt it in his chest as she described the rain, the twisted door, the way he had told her to stay awake while her blood soaked into his jacket, details he had never shared with anyone because they belonged to a version of himself he didn't think mattered. He stared at her now, seeing not the composed woman across the table but flashes of that night, her face pale under flashing lights, her breath shallow, his hands shaking as he fought panic and forced calm because someone needed him to be steady, and when she finished, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for 3 years. He didn't ask why she hadn't found him, didn't accuse her of hiding who she was, didn't marvel at her wealth, because none of that seemed important compared to the fact that she was alive and sitting in front of him, her eyes glassy not with power but with gratitude and something that looked dangerously close to fear. "I didn't save you," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "I just didn't leave." That sentence struck Evelyn harder than any praise ever had, because it explained everything about him, why his daughter felt safe, why strangers trusted him, why he had walked away from fame, reward, and recognition without a second thought. She told him then what no one else knew, that Lily had been conceived the same week as the accident, that waking up in the hospital and learning she was pregnant had changed every decision she made afterward, that the empire she built had been fueled not by ambition alone but by terror of ever being powerless again. Marcus listened, hands folded, eyes steady, and when she finished, he asked the simplest, most dangerous question of all, "What do you want from me now?" Evelyn had asked herself that question all night, and the answer scared her more than any hostile takeover ever had. She wanted nothing that could be written into a contract, nothing that could be bought or controlled, and she admitted that she didn't know if she wanted a second chance at love, or closure, or just honesty after years of silence, but what she did know was that she didn't want to keep lying, especially not to the girls. When they returned from the dessert case, sugar-dusted and laughing, Marcus watched how Lily looked at Evelyn with complete trust, how Emma leaned into him instinctively, and something shifted in him too, because he saw a future branching quietly in front of them, fragile and terrifying and real. The next weeks unfolded cautiously, not with grand gestures but with shared breakfasts, playground conversations, homework at the same table, and Evelyn learning how strange and wonderful it felt to be known without being feared. Marcus refused every offer of money she hinted at, every attempt to fix his life with resources instead of presence, and when she finally asked why, he told her that Emma didn't need a rich childhood, she needed a present one, and that was something no billionaire could outsource. The media found out eventually, of course, someone always did, but when headlines tried to turn Marcus into a charity project or a fairy tale prize, Evelyn did something else unbelievable. She shut them down completely, threatening lawsuits, pulling advertising, making it clear that this story was not for sale. What no one reported was the night Marcus almost walked away, overwhelmed by the pressure, convinced he didn't belong in Evelyn's world, and the way she followed him into the rain and said, "I don't need you to fit my life. I need you to choose it." What no one saw was Emma calling Evelyn Mom, by accident and freezing in terror, or Lily grabbing Marcus's hand during a nightmare because he felt safe, or the way two broken timelines began to stitch themselves together not through wealth or destiny, but through quiet consistency. And as the past finally loosened its grip, One last truth waited in the shadows, ready to surface and test whether what they were building was strong enough to survive what came next. The truth arrived not as a single explosion but as a slow, relentless wave, and by the time Evelyn realized it could no longer be held back, it had already begun to reshape every corner of their lives. It started with a letter, handwritten, unmarked, slipped beneath the gate of her estate in the quiet hours before dawn, words that carried the unmistakable weight of someone who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she had survived. The letter spoke of the accident, of corporate betrayal, of a decision made years ago that had cost lives and fortunes alike, and as Evelyn read it, her hands trembled not from fear but from rage sharpened by memory. She knew immediately who had sent it. The former executive she had quietly outmaneuvered after the crash, the man whose recklessness had forced her into that car on that stormy night, the ghost she thought she had buried beneath settlements and silence. What he wanted now was leverage, and what he believed would break her was not money but exposure of Marcus, of the girls, of the fragile life she had finally allowed herself to build. When she told Marcus, she expected anger or panic, but instead he surprised her again by doing what he always did, grounding her. He reminded her that fear only worked when it isolated people, and that secrets lost their power once spoken aloud. For the first time in her life, Evelyn didn't handle the crisis alone. She looped Marcus into meetings, not as a symbol or shield but as a partner, and though he despised boardrooms and legal jargon, his moral clarity cut through arguments that had stalled entire teams of experts. When the blackmailer finally made his move, threatening to go public with distorted versions of the past, Evelyn stood beside Marcus on the courthouse steps and told the full truth herself, about the accident, the corruption, the years of rebuilding, and the world listened not because she was a billionaire but because she was finally human. The fallout was swift but not catastrophic. Stocks dipped, headlines screamed, pundits speculated, yet something unexpected happened too, people rallied. Survivors of corporate negligence spoke up, whistleblowers came forward, and the man who thought he could destroy her found himself exposed instead, undone by the very silence he had relied on for so long. Through it all, the girls remained the compass. Emma, wise beyond her years, asked one night if being brave meant never being scared, and Marcus answered her the way he always answered hard questions, by telling the truth, that bravery was choosing love even when fear made better arguments. Lily watched Evelyn closely during those weeks, learning not from speeches but from actions, and one evening she said quietly, "You're different now," not as an accusation but as a discovery. Evelyn realized then that the greatest legacy she could leave her daughter wasn't an empire, but an example of a life lived honestly. Months later, there was no grand wedding, no magazine covers, no dramatic announcement. There was a backyard filled with mismatched chairs, laughter drifting through open windows, and two girls walking hand in hand ahead of them, arguing about which stars were brightest. Marcus never became rich, and Evelyn never stopped being powerful, but the space between those truths no longer felt like a divide. When Marcus finally asked her, on an ordinary evening over burnt pasta, whether she regretted that blind date, Evelyn laughed, a sound lighter than anything she'd known before, and told him the truth she once would have hidden behind contracts and caution. She said that wealth had given her everything except peace, and love had given her peace without asking for anything in return. As the night settled and the house grew quiet, Evelyn understood that the most unbelievable thing she had ever done wasn't revealing her identity or risking her reputation. It was choosing a life she couldn't control, with a man who had once saved her without knowing her name, and with children who reminded her every day that the richest future was the one built together. Honestly, and without fear.